All right, so get this. Today we're going deep on something, well, kind of spooky, but also super interesting. We're talking demonic possession, but get this,
Yeah.
there's a twist.
Yeah. It gets pretty wild.
You've been researching this, and not just like the history of possession and stuff, but like, could it be connected to paranormal knowledge? I mean, you found some really interesting research on this.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really fascinating area where those two ideas, possession and paranormal knowledge, they kind of intersect.
Right.
We always think about, possession as like a purely spiritual thing or religious, but what if, what if it unlocks knowledge that you couldn't get normally? You know what I mean?
That's what makes this deep dive so interesting, right?
It really is.
So we've got two sources to help us unpack all of this, right?
Yeah.
First, we've got this 2023 academic paper, right? It's reviewing all these scientific cases of demonic possession, like
Yeah.
from way back 1890 all the way to 2023. But then, to really like shake things up, we have this case study. It's from India, 1989, about a potential possession case. But here's the thing. The person, they seemingly gain paranormal knowledge.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know, right? Okay, so first, the
Yeah.
academic paper. I think what's really interesting about it is that it tries to like look at demonic possession through like a scientific lens,
Yeah.
taking an interdisciplinary approach,
Yeah.
which is cool.
It is, and it really highlights, the challenges of studying something that, I mean, how do you even study this stuff scientifically?
Exactly. It does make you wonder, right? Like, how do you even begin to study something like this scientifically?
Well, that's one of the key things that this paper digs into.
Right.
It looks at the history of demonic possession, showing how, and this is surprising, how widespread this belief is across cultures and time periods.
Yeah.
It's like this, I don't know, this universal fear of the unknown, fear of forces that are beyond our control. It's like the paper kind of summarizes how different cultures have tried to like make sense of these fears.
It's amazing, though, that even with all of our like scientific advancements, right,
Hmm.
this topic still sparks so much debate.
It does.
Some people still see possession as this genuine spiritual phenomenon, right?
Hmm.
While others just view it as a manifestation of mental illness.
And that's exactly what the paper grapples with, that question. Like,
Yeah.
how do you distinguish between genuine possession and something like a dissociative disorder or psychosis?
Right.
There's no easy answer,
That's the thing.
which is why this interdisciplinary approach is so important.
Yeah, I agree.
You got to bring in like different perspectives.
So that brings us to this wild case study from India. It's about this young woman, Sumitra Singh, and she seemingly dies, is revived, but then starts claiming to be another woman. Her name was Shiva, and she had died 2 months prior under, get this, suspicious circumstances.
It sounds like a movie or something.
Right. What makes this case so compelling is, like, how much detail Sumitra can give about Shiva's life. Details that, according to the researchers, she couldn't have known. We're talking very specific things, like nicknames only used within Shiva's family, the order her uncles were born in, even the name of the college she attended.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's those little details, those like insignificant personal details
Right.
that make it so fascinating. It's hard to imagine how she could have just made this stuff up,
Fabricated it
or even like come across it accidentally.
by chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Sumitra was a young woman from like a rural village,
Okay.
limited education, never traveled outside her immediate area. Yet after this near-death experience, she's talking about this other woman who lived like over 100 kilometers away.
It's a long way.
Yeah, back then especially.
Especially back then. It really raises questions about how did this information get transferred?
And it gets weirder.
What?
Sumitra's behavior changed dramatically.
Oh,
She started adopting mannerisms, habits, that were consistent with Shiva's personality and background. For example, Shiva's family, they were Brahmins. So that's a high caste in India.
okay.
While Sumitra's family were Thakurs, a lower caste.
Mm-hmm.
But after, her revival,
Yeah.
Sumitra started displaying Brahmin customs that were completely foreign to her own upbringing.
That's so strange.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, this change in behavior, especially like adopting the customs of a different caste, that suggests like a deeper integration. It's
Right.
not just mimicry.
I was thinking the same thing. It goes even further. She even started to read and write Hindi fluently,
Wow.
a skill set more aligned with Shiva's education than her own. Like some part of Shiva's knowledge and abilities transferred over to Sumitra.
It really makes you think.
Now, before we go too far down this road, it's important to note the researchers who investigated this, they were meticulous, right?
Yeah.
They spent months interviewing witnesses, verifying Sumitra's claims, trying to reconstruct the timeline of events.
They really went all in.
Right. They weren't just taking this at face value.
No, not at all.
They approached this with scientific rigor.
They documented everything carefully.
Yeah, did they find anything that could explain this through normal means?
Well, they tried. They really did.
Yeah.
They mapped out the geography and social connections between Sumitra's village and Shiva's hometown to see if there was any chance of prior contact or information exchange between the families,
So they were trying to eliminate any possibility that Sumitra might have known Shiva or her family in some way.
Exactly.
That's really thorough.
And you know what? They came up empty.
Really?
They couldn't find any plausible way that she could have got this information through, normal channels.
It just keeps getting more and more intriguing.
It does.
And I can't believe we haven't even talked about Shiva's death yet.
Right. That's another layer to this whole thing.
Oh my God.
So Shiva had died 2 months before Sumitra's revival, and while her in-laws claimed it was a suicide, there was a strong suspicion of foul play.
Okay, now this is starting to sound like a true crime mystery. Tell me more.
Well, Shiva's in-laws said she threw herself in front of a train,
Oh my
but
God.
her body was found between the tracks largely intact.
Oh.
And the crazy thing is they cremated her body really quickly. They didn't even wait for Shiva's fodder to arrive from a nearby city, even though relatives were like, hey, wait, delay the cremation.
I can see why people were suspicious.
Oh.
It does sound like they were trying to cover something up.
Oh, definitely. Shiva's father certainly thought so.
Yeah.
He was convinced it was murder.
Wow.
And he even filed charges against her in-laws.
Oh, wow.
And you know what? The case was still under investigation when Sumitra's alleged possession began.
Wow, so you have this young woman, Sumitra, who seemingly dies, revives, and then starts claiming to be the victim of this unsolved potential murder.
And she's providing all this detailed knowledge about Shiva's life that she seemingly couldn't have known.
Yeah, this is incredible.
It's a truly remarkable case.
It is.
And it forced the researchers to, consider explanations that challenge, conventional scientific understanding.
Right.
So they identified 4 main possibilities to explain what happened to Sumitra.
Okay, let's dive into those possibilities because I'm dying to know what they conclude.
Okay, so we'll explore those in detail next time, but let me just quickly lay them out for you.
Okay.
So they considered fraud, cryptomnesia,
Okay.
a secondary personality with paranormal knowledge,
Okay.
and of course the possibility of possession.
All right, listener, get ready for part 2 because we're about to unpack some seriously mind-bending theories.
We're going to delve into each of those and examine why the researchers ultimately found one more convincing than the others. Okay, so let's start with, the most skeptical explanation, right? Fraud. Could Sumitra or someone else be, orchestrating this big hoax?
Yeah, that was my first thought, too, is this just a clever fabrication?
Yeah.
But, the researchers, they really dove into that possibility.
Yeah.
And they present some pretty strong arguments against it.
Yeah, motive is key, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would Sumitra gain by pretending to be Shiva?
Right.
Maybe a little attention, some sympathy. But the researchers point out that her life didn't really improve much after this whole, possession thing.
Yeah, she was still in her village, facing the same challenges.
Exactly.
Okay, but what if it wasn't for personal gain? Could someone else be behind it? Like maybe a family member? Or even like that exorcist Vishwanath who was involved in the case?
That's another angle they looked at. But even if someone else was, pulling the strings, how would they have gotten such detailed information about Shiva?
Right.
Remember, this was way before the internet and social media.
Yeah. Gathering that level of detail would have been, really difficult.
Yeah, especially back then.
Right. And what about those times when Sumitra recognized people connected to Shiva?
Oh, right.
The research mentions she correctly identified 23 people, either in person or from photos. Some of those photos were from Shiva's childhood and had never been published.
Yeah, how do you explain that?
It's hard to write those off as just coincidences
Yeah.
or lucky guesses,
Yeah.
especially the ones that were spontaneous, where there wasn't any, prompting or leading questions.
Yeah, the researchers documented these very carefully, noting if there was any chance of her, being cued or given hints.
Like that example where one of Shiva's uncles just approached Sumitra and asked, "Who am I?" And she immediately knew, "You are my mother's brother."
That's incredible.
I know. Or when they showed her a photo of Shiva's nephew, she instantly said his name
Wow.
and even asked where he and Shiva's children were.
Oh my goodness.
It's like she had this deep personal knowledge of their family relationships.
It would be, I mean, it would be really tough to fake that level of familiarity.
I think so too. Okay, so if we rule out fraud, what about cryptomnesia?
Mm-hmm.
Could Sumitra have subconsciously absorbed information about Shiva and then developed a secondary personality based on that?
So that's the second possibility the researchers looked into,
Yeah.
cryptomnesia, or like source amnesia.
Uh,
It's when you forget where you learned something and think you came up with it on your own.
yeah, I've had that happen.
It's like you think you had this original idea, but then you realize, oh, wait, I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
But in Sumitra's case, we're talking about a huge amount of really specific information about a person she supposedly had no connection to.
And doesn't that assume that she came across this information somehow in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, even if she overheard a conversation or saw a newspaper article about Shiva, wouldn't it be really difficult to retain that much detail?
Mm.
Especially about someone she didn't know personally.
Right. And that's the problem with applying cryptomnesia to this case.
Yeah.
Even if we say, okay, she somehow encountered all this information, it still doesn't explain how she could recognize specific people in photographs, especially those taken years earlier.
That's a good point.
Facial recognition is complex, you know. It relies on a kind of subconscious pattern recognition.
You can't really fake it.
It's not something you can easily replicate from like a verbal description or a casual encounter.
So it sounds like cryptomnesia alone doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Which brings us to a possibility that I find even more intriguing. A secondary personality, but with paranormal knowledge. So could Sumitra have developed this secondary personality that somehow accessed information about Shiva through, I don't know, ESP or something?
Now we're getting into uncharted territory, right? This opens up questions about consciousness and whether it can operate beyond the physical world, you know?
Right.
We typically associate consciousness with the brain. But, you know, some cases of secondary personality exhibiting limited ESP abilities, those have been documented.
Mm-hmm.
But the scope and specificity of Sumitra's knowledge about Shiva, I mean, that would be extraordinary.
It's like her secondary personality, this Shiva persona, was somehow tapping into Shiva's memories and experiences directly.
Yeah.
And not just memories. It seemed like she even inherited some of Shiva's skills and personality traits.
That's right. The researchers acknowledged this possibility, but they also admitted that it pushes the boundaries of what we currently understand, scientifically speaking. I mean, if Sumitra's case is genuine, it has huge implications for how we understand consciousness and, the nature of identity.
Yeah.
It suggests that the mind might be more interconnected and less confined to the individual than we currently believe.
This is why I love these deep dives.
Me too.
They challenge us to think outside the box and consider possibilities that might seem outlandish. Okay, so finally, we arrive at the most controversial explanation. Possession. Could the deceased Shiva actually be possessing Sumitra's body?
Here's where things get really interesting.
Right.
The concept of possession has been around forever, you know,
Right.
often tied to religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But what if there's a scientific basis to it?
Oh, wow.
What if consciousness can somehow survive bodily death and under certain circumstances, inhabit another living being?
That's a big question.
It's a question that's fascinated philosophers and scientists for a long time.
Yeah, and the researchers pointed out that Sumitra's case shares similarities with other documented possession cases.
Oh, like what?
Like the famous case of Laurency Venom back in the late 19th century.
Oh, yeah.
Laurency was a young girl who seemingly became possessed by the spirit of a deceased neighbor. And she displayed a complete personality change and detailed knowledge of the neighbor's life.
Wow.
These cases raise some pretty fascinating questions about the relationship between consciousness and the brain.
They really do.
Yeah.
They challenge the materialist view
Yeah.
that consciousness is just a product of the brain,
All right.
a purely material phenomenon.
Could there be something more to us? Something that persists even after our physical bodies stop working?
It makes you wonder.
It really does. And remember, Sumitra's possession started right after she seemingly died and was revived.
Right.
It's like that near-death experience opened a door for Shiva's consciousness to enter her body.
That's interesting. Do you think there's Like a connection there?
I don't know. That's a question researchers have been exploring for a long time.
Yeah.
Many cultures believe that certain states of consciousness, like near-death experiences, trances, even deep meditation, can make you vulnerable to possession, you know?
Oh, interesting.
It's like a temporary shift in our consciousness creates like an opening for another consciousness to enter.
That's fascinating.
Okay, so we've got these four possible explanations.
Yeah.
Each one, like, more mind-boggling than the last.
Right. So what did the researchers conclude?
Yeah, did they land on one definitive answer?
Well, they were careful not to make any absolute claims,
Okay,
but they did say that after, eliminating the other possibilities, they found possession to be the most plausible explanation for Sumitra's case.
so they weren't saying definitively it was possession, but given what they observed, it seemed like the most likely explanation.
Exactly. They acknowledged that the evidence was, circumstantial,
Yeah.
but the sheer weight of it, the
Yeah.
detailed knowledge, the personality changes, the timing of the possession in relation to both Shiva's death and Sumitra's near-death experience.
Right, it all pointed in that direction. It
Exactly.
sounds like they were trying to strike a balance
Yeah.
between acknowledging how unusual this case is and the limitations of, scientific inquiry when dealing with phenomena that just defy conventional explanation.
And this brings up an important point about evidence itself. Like, how do you prove something that falls outside the realm of like traditional scientific measurement?
That's a good question.
Can eyewitness testimony and behavioral observation, can those be considered valid evidence when we're dealing with, paranormal phenomena?
Those are questions that have been debated for ages,
Yeah.
especially in fields like parapsychology. Did the researchers address those limitations in their study?
They did.
So,
They acknowledged that their study relied a lot on witness accounts, which can be, subjective and prone to error.
yeah.
They also admitted that they couldn't definitively rule out like some unknown normal explanation that we just haven't thought of yet.
Okay.
But what's great about their approach is like their intellectual honesty, They didn't try to force the evidence to fit some like preconceived conclusion.
Right.
They presented the facts, explored the possibilities, and left room for doubt.
And that's what makes this deep dive so captivating. We're not searching for easy answers.
Exactly.
We're exploring the mysteries of the human mind and the possibility that there might be more to reality than we currently understand.
I love that.
This has been such a fascinating discussion. I think we need to take a break, let our listener kind of absorb all of this.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
We'll be back in a moment to explore some of the bigger questions this case raises and what it might mean for how we understand consciousness and identity. All right, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive, haven't we? We've explored this incredible case of Sumitra Singh, looked at fraud, cryptomnesia, a secondary personality with, maybe paranormal knowledge, and we ended up at possession as like the most likely explanation,
Yeah.
at least according to the researchers.
Yeah, and I just want to, emphasize again, the researchers were very careful not to say, okay, possession, that's it, case closed.
Yeah.
They knew there were limitations to their study and just the inherent challenges of like scientifically studying, paranormal phenomena. It's not easy.
It's not like they were saying, look, we've proven possession exists.
Right, exactly.
But they made a strong case for it being the most likely explanation based on, everything they observed.
Yeah, and that's what I appreciate about their approach,
Yeah.
They're skeptical, but they're also open to the idea that what we currently understand scientifically, maybe it's not the whole picture.
Right.
Maybe it's incomplete.
I think that's a good takeaway for anyone exploring these kinds of topics.
Absolutely.
We need to be willing to, like, challenge what we think we know, consider different perspectives, and maybe even be okay with a little uncertainty.
Oh, yeah, totally. If we're stuck in our ways, clinging to what we think we know, we might miss out on some really fascinating, thought-provoking possibilities.
I think what really gets me thinking is this. If a case like Sumitra's is even remotely possible,
Yeah.
what does it say about how we understand consciousness?
Right.
We tend to think of consciousness as being, like, tied to the brain,
Yeah.
to our bodies.
Yeah, Western science, has traditionally seen the mind as a product of the brain,
Right.
just a material thing.
But cases like Sumitra's, and there are, others in parapsychology research, they suggest that maybe consciousness isn't so easily contained.
Right.
It's almost like the idea of the soul, this non-physical essence of who we are.
Yeah.
It's coming back into the conversation, but this time through like a scientific lens.
That's what's so interesting about it.
It really is.
It leads to even bigger questions.
Yeah.
Like, if consciousness can survive death, does that mean there's some kind of life after death?
I mean, these are questions humans have been asking forever.
I know, right?
But now, with cases like Sumitra's being studied scientifically, it feels like we're moving beyond just speculation,
Yeah.
into a place where science might actually help us understand these, like, age-old mysteries.
And it's not just about, the afterlife.
No.
Cases like this also make us think about, like, identity.
Yeah.
What is identity?
If Sumitra was really possessed by Shiva,
Yeah.
does that mean our sense of self is, like, more fluid, more interconnected than we realize?
Yeah, it challenges that notion of individuality.
Yeah.
Right.
That we're all separate.
Yeah.
It suggests that the boundaries between us
Mm-hmm.
might be more permeable than we think.
Which is kind of a mind-blowing thought.
It is.
It's fascinating, but also maybe a little unsettling.
Yeah, a little bit.
It makes you wonder about personal identity.
Yeah.
How much of who we are is really, like, unique
Yeah. What makes me?
and separate from others?
That's a deep question.
This whole deep dive has been amazing, hasn't it? We started with demonic possession and ended up exploring these huge questions about consciousness, identity, life after death. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. I hope it's left you with, like, a sense of wonder and a desire to keep exploring these topics.
We've just scratched the surface, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a glimpse into just how complex and mysterious the human mind is.
And maybe it's even sparked some new questions for you. Maybe it's challenged some of your beliefs or opened your mind to possibilities you hadn't considered before. That's what we love about the deep dive.
Yeah.
Taking these topics that seem, kind of obscure
Yeah.
and showing how much depth they really have.
Because sometimes it's in those shadowy places, the unexplored parts of our knowledge, that we find the most profound insights.
That's a great way to put it. So to our listeners, as you continue to explore the world around you, remember to stay curious, keep asking questions, and maybe, just maybe, allow yourself to be surprised by what you find.
The world is full of mysteries.
It is.
And who knows what wonders await those who dare to seek them out.
That's right. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.